So, for section 4.3, once again, there was no highlight video because, did I mention hurricane? However, the only thing that would have been in that highlight video is that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. We've said that before, but now they start using this an acronym for it, the CPCTC. That's just what your book calls it. I will still probably throw some symbols in there instead of writing the C's and the T's because it's what I do. I'm a symbol girl. So for this section, and probably only for this section, I wanted to make sure you really had the proof thing down because relatively soon, like in this chapter, we're going to make you write your own proofs. And when I say we, I mean me. And when I say write your own proofs, I mean from scratch, on the test, gotta be right, have the right form and everything. So part of that is going to be you doing them in this section. And then instead of looking in the back of the book to see what the answers are, you're going to be emailing them to me. I will check them and get back to you probably on the same day. That's a big probably, huh? So when you do them, make sure you get them to me as soon as possible. If that means you take a picture of them and text them to me, which is probably faster, that's what I would do. And I'll sit there and I'll check them. And as long as you've gotten them all written down the way you're supposed to, I'd be able to check them without a book. So that leads us to the, let's make sure you really got this thing down. So for the classwork section, because all this chapter is, all this section is about is now they're telling you that they are congruent triangles, and they want you to use the rules for congruent triangles to say that since my triangles are congruent, then these things must be true too. So you have to know what it is that makes triangles congruent, and obviously if the triangles are congruent, then those things would be true. So if you have two congruent triangles, you know that side angle side must be a thing that's the same in both of those because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So they must have the side angle side element to it. It must have the angle side element to it. In fact, it's got all sides and all angles element to it because that's the corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent part. However, for this one in particular, I'm not asking you to prove that parts of those triangles are congruent. I'm asking you to prove that a part of those triangles are congruent. So go ahead, write this down, take some time, write it down, see how far you can get. Now, you might not prove it the same way I prove it, but you'll be able to tell whether or not yours is right. As long as you don't make some great grand jump from one thing to another, you're probably going to be fine. But just to be sure, if you want to wait, go ahead and wait. I'm not saying you shouldn't. You should go ahead and write down everything. Write down what you know is correct. Then if you're curious, go ahead and plan in your head what you would do and see if I do it the same way you planned it. It's okay. So pause the tape, give yourself some time, and then we'll go through this one, and this is your classwork part. And then after that, I'll tell you what the homework part is that you have to send to me. But I'm going to ask you to go ahead and do the homework part right after this, so I can go ahead and get the homework part and have it graded before tonight in case you have to go back and correct the homework part, which I'm really hoping you don't. So go ahead, put a pause on it. I'll wait. Really, pause. Are you sure you paused long enough? Have you put the proper amount of thought into this problem? Do you already know what the answer is? Let's find out. Okay, so given triangle ABD is congruent to triangle AEC, So I told you before, as soon as you're given information, you need to make sure you mark your figure, of which nothing over here is marked. So I'm going to get happy with the marking. So if triangle ABD is congruent to triangle AEC, that means that this angle here must be congruent to that angle there. And B has to match up with E. And D has to match up with I'll just put 2 marks on it. That means my 3 and 2 are congruent. Okay? And going back to the sides thing, triangle ABD, that means that this side must be congruent to that side. And this side must be congruent to that side. And this side has to be congruent to that side. Okay. That's a lot of information. So basically, I want to know about this one right here, BC and DE. Okay. So obviously that's part of this triangle and this triangle. And if I prove those 2 triangles congruent, then I'd be good with this. But we don't have those 2 triangles. We have that triangle is congruent to that triangle. Well, that's not really helpful now, is it? Or is it? Let's start with what we were given. Triangle ABD is congruent to triangle AEC, which is by given. Now, I need this one and that one. And if we're going to try to prove that these 2 are congruent, I either need to show that these angles are congruent, because that's the side. I already have this side and that side. I could either have this side, but we don't have that. That's what we're trying to find. Or we could talk about angles. I have an angle, but that would be angle side, which is not a choice. ASS is not a choice. It would have to be side, angle, side, which means it'd have to be that angle up there. Well, that's not good. Or we could have angle, angle, side, but that would mean I need to know about angle 1. Okay. If I need to know about angle 1, that means that angle 1 and angle 2 are linear pairs, and angle 3 and angle 4 are linear pairs, which means 1 and 4 must be congruent, and now we're getting somewhere. Okay, so that's the track I'm going to try to take, which means I need to start with saying that angle 2 and angle 3 are congruent. Okay, so step 2. Angle 2 is congruent to angle 3 because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And that's how I marked them. Okay, and that means that angle 2 measure of angle 2 is equal to the measure of angle 3, because I got to get the m's in there first before we can do the 180 thing. So the measure of angle 2 is equal to the measure of angle 3. That's the definition of congruent. Of congruent angles. So now that I have that, I can say that measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 is equal to 180 because they are a linear pair. Oh, sorry, that's 4. So that means that the measure of angle one plus the measure of angle 3 equal 180. That's by substitution. It's a long proof. Bear with me. I'm going to try to squeeze a 6 in down here. So I have this, that 1 and 3 add up to 180. But I'm going to go ahead and write the measure of angle 4 plus the measure of angle 3 equals 180 by definition of linear pair. So I have 4 and 3 equal 180 and 1 and 3 equal 180. So by substitution, I should probably subtract things first. You have more room than I do. By substitution, actually no. Back to the subtraction thing. The measure of angle 1 is going to equal 180 minus the measure of angle 3. And the measure of angle 4 is going to equal 180 minus the measure of angle 3. I'm going to squeeze those in since they have the same reason as subtraction property of equality for number 7. And then by substitution, I would get measure of angle 1 is equal to the measure of angle 4. So now I've gotten that 1 and 4 are the same. So I have 2 sides and 2 angles. So that'll allow me to do my side angle side. No, that's not the way it was, because remember we'd have to have that angle if it were side angle side. So side, 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 no, we need that one. So angle, side, angle. No, we have 2 angles, but we don't have the side in between. Angle, angle, side. That one we've got. We've got 1B and that one, and 4E and that one. So angle, angle, side is good. Or if you wanted to do it, you could have said B1 and that one, and E4 and that one. Either way, it's going to be by angle, angle, side. So now I can say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle AED by angle side. Because just to highlight, not that you would have to do this, but just to highlight it, we said that B and E are congruent. We didn't. We should have. Yeah. I'll go back and write it. See how that happens? When we want you to be specific, you gotta put it all in there. Angle B is congruent. Oh, sorry, let me get this in here too. Which means that angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. Definition of congruent. Angles, and then number 10, let's get in that angle B is congruent to angle E, since we need that for our proof, which is corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And the same thing about AB and AE. AB is congruent to AE because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Now I can say it because I've got my angle side. Triangle AB, woo, I'm out of room again. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle AED. And we said that was because of angle side. Now, step 13. Since I have that, that means that BC is congruent to ED, which is how they had me do it from the right angles. And the reason for that is corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. That's a really long proof, very, very detailed. Couldn't make any jumps, had to put everything on paper. But it did get the job done. Yours should not be that long. I had to take triangles that were proven, that were already true to be congruent. I had to take that, split it up into their individual parts to prove two other triangles congruent to prove their parts congruent. That's why it was a long triangle. We had two different, long proof. We had two different sets of congruent triangles to deal with. Yours are not going to be that long. Yours are only going to be one set. You're not going to have to stress over it. All the rules should be right there in your head, easy to come by, just like that. So, for your homework for this section, it is located on page 142. Actually, it's 141 and 142 in practice exercises. Numbers 2, 4, 6, and 11. And all the answers to those are in the back of the book, but you'd rather have me check them, I promise, because when I check them, then I know that what you mean is what you mean, as opposed to having to word it the way they put it in the back of the book, which isn't always the way I want you to word it, nor is it always the simplest way. So, done with that. This would be a great place for me to give you a quiz, but I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think we're going to have very many quizzes in this at all. But it could happen. Who knows? If it does, make sure you know about angle, side, angle, 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 side, side, angle, side, 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 side. I think that's it. Okay. Have a good day.